The Spain Grand Prix is one of the oldest races in the championship, with its inaugural race being held in 1951. The race is typically held at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, located near Barcelona. The track is 4.655 kilometers long and features a mix of high-speed sections with slower corners and elevation changes, which provides a pretty challenging circuit for the drivers. The Spain Grand Prix has seen many memorable moments and intense battles throughout its history. It has been a race to look forward to on the F1 calendar and has showcased the skills of numerous legendary drivers such as Senna, Schumacher, and Hamilton, who have all achieved great success here at this event. Some recent winners of the event include Maldonado, Alonso, Hamilton, Rosberg, and Verstappen, with Hamilton winning 6 of the past 10 events. This year, racing fans and drivers alike can look forward to the removal of the chicane in the final sector of the track. Formula One will return back to the original layout, which was last run in 2006, which will finish the track with 2 high-speed corners. This is to promote better racing throughout the circuit and hopefully allows for some more overtakes. Let's go racing in the land of rabbits. Hey, how's it going, racing fans? Hope you guys are having a great week. We're back at it again, here to talk about qualifying with the Spain Grand Prix. And so it is Saturday. We've got a 1 day till race day. A couple of notes. They did make some additions and subtractions to the track. Very notable removal of the chicane in the final sector, and they added some more faster, sweepy kind of corners. And then they also added in turn 1 a runoff as well with some gravel there, which we are going to be very familiar with after qualifying today. Trust me. And also there's cooler and damper temperatures, damper conditions and cooler temperatures, there you go, which are going to cause some issues for some drivers. And notably, there's one damp spot that a lot of people seem to be running into that was on the main line. And so that was causing some people some issues, but also some teams that maybe didn't succeed or haven't succeeded very much throughout the season saw a little bit of pace. And I'll mention McLaren before we get started, because the temperatures were different than what we've seen throughout past races and past weekends. It's given some teams some opportunities to be like, wait a second, we have a little bit of speed when it's cooler outside. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But let's go ahead and get into qualifying. And so what we see in Q1, right off the bat, Alonso kind of drives into the gravel. He doesn't cause any disruption to other drivers or anything. There's no yellow or red, but right off the bat, you're like, okay, woo, that's not good. Then Yuki slides, and then De Vries slides, very similar spot. And then Bottas slides into the gravel, which ultimately causes a red. And then Alex Albon slides into the gravel in turn 5. De Vries slides it again in the same place, so Debris is back at it again, 2 slides in the same place. And then end of Q1, time's up, Leclerc is on the bubble, and he seemed to be having some issues, and I feel like they just didn't know what was going on. They just knew that their car was all out of whack. Oh, the balance is bad, blah, 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 whatever. And so after everybody crosses the line, you're like, wait a second. When the time runs out, you're just like, okay, there's still some times to come in, they'll cross the line. Leclerc's going to bump up, he'll be fine, right? Happens all the time. Nope. Doesn't get a good enough time. And so at the end of Q1, you got Bottas, Magnussen, Albon, Leclerc, and Sargent all eliminated. And so I would say some teams that maybe saw some success during practices are not seeing the same success. I know some of you guys think I have this favoritism with Haas. I really just think Haas sometimes has decent qualifying, and I'm like, oh, it's cute to see him up there. I mean, during practice, they were actually doing pretty okay. But then Magnussen, you see, gets bumped here in Q1. So let's see how the rest of this kind of plays out. Moving on to Q2, Perez loses it in the gravel again, king of the streets, right? And that kind of ruins his qualifying attempt. He really flubbed up there, and you can kind of see for the second straight week that he has made mistakes, which is, I don't know if I should say uncharacteristic, but I think the expectations are higher of him when he's on such a prestigious team. And so I know a lot of Perez fans are a little bit frustrated with that. Then Mercedes drivers kind of get into one another. Maybe it's a little bit awkward. One of them was on a hot lap. One of them's coming off a lap. They were kind of just confused. And I was like, oh, hold up. Don't take each other out. But after Q2, really you see Perez, Russell, Zhao, De Vries, and Yuki eliminated. I don't think there's anybody in here that you're like, wow, they shouldn't be in that spot. I mean, I would say Russell and Perez could definitely be better, especially with how we know Mercedes is, their history here is just insane, right? And so you're like, come on, George, let's pick it up. And then Perez, after he kind of spun it there, I think everybody kind of knew the writing was on the wall. His quality attempt was over. But getting into Q3, I don't have any crazy notes, honestly. Piastri made a pretty big mistake. He ended up getting lower than he maybe should have. We did see Lando qualify very well, and I think, with McLaren, I mentioned it earlier, they were doing really well with the colder temperatures. I mean, you saw Lando I honestly may be a little bit lucky. I don't think this is something that you'll necessarily see carry over into his race pace. We'll see. Hopefully it does, right? I'm a McLaren fan. And then really something you also see is Gasly received a 6th place grid penalty for impeding Verstappen and Sainz during qualifying. And so that's really going to hurt his attempt here. Alpines have been looking pretty good. And, now he has this grid penalty, which is going to take him back quite a bit. And so that's going to be frustrating on his part. But end all be all, I'll go ahead and throw the qualifying up here. And let's go over and just see how everybody kind of panned out here. We got Max Verstappen catching pole, Sainz second, Lando third. We got Lewis Hamilton going fourth. And we see Lance Stroll fifth. And you're like, wait a second, where's Alonso? Shouldn't Alonso be a little higher up? Yeah, Lance actually qualified better than Alonso. That's news, right? Then we have Ocon sixth, Hulkenberg getting seventh. And so you're like, okay, Haas, hey, that's good, man. That's awesome. They're in the top 10 to start. We got Alonso 8th. Then we have Piastri breaking the top 10. And then Gasly is in 10th. And so he received kind of a double whammy. I mentioned it earlier, but for impeding Sainz and Verstappen, they add that boom, slap that 3 + 3 is 6. That's not fun on his end. We got Sergio finding his way out of the top 10, as well as George Russell. And then we have Zhao Guanyu, Nick De Vries, Yuki, Bottas, Magnussen, Albon, Leclerc, and Sargent. And so really what's cool about the qualifying that happened here is that I feel like the race conditions for qualifying allowed for some mixing and matching that we might not have anticipated going into this weekend. And so we see 7 different teams represented in the top 7, which is super cool, right? We have a lot of diversity, which hopefully that can carry over to the race results as well. However, I don't necessarily think that'll be the case. I feel like some of these conditions, some of these teams got a little bit lucky, some people got a little unlucky. And so something I'm looking forward to with this race, you see Leclerc pretty far down, and you also see George Russell and Sergio Perez pretty far down as well. And we know they have pace, and so it'll be cool seeing them kind of climb up. As well as Pierre Gasly, I can see him being a climber as well. He's starting 10th, but did have that penalty. I think he can maybe crack a top 5 if he's good. And so, some people to be on the lookout for, a lot of overtaking opportunities with the subtraction of the chicane. And so let's get into race day and let's see what happens. So the Grand Prix is over. Let's talk about it. So the start of the race, really something to talk about right off the bat. Leclerc started in the pits. He had a lot of issues with qualifying, if you guys remember, with his car just not vibing. So they changed a bunch of things, and due to that, he had to start in the pits. And so he was already starting pretty far back anyway, and so I'd rather them feel confident in what they're working with than just keep the car out there knowing that there's issues. So they might as well change some things, right? And so he started in the pits, and so maybe he'll be a climber, right? That's kind of what I thought yesterday. And then something right off the bat, there's not too much shuffling at the start. Notably, Norris and Hamilton make contact. Norris gets into the back of Hamilton, had some front wing damage, has to dive into the pits. And so if you recall, Lando had a really good qualifying session, qualified third. So I was looking forward to, a top 10 finish again, right? And, he botches it in the first lap. McLaren fans, yay, unite. Stroll up 2 spots in the start, which is awesome. Russell kind of got off on his own with the start of the race as well. You're like, wait, what happened? Why is he off to the side? And I feel like he almost just kind of got off on his own, trying to avoid some shenanigans with others. I'm not sure, but quickly becomes like after a few laps, it started to kind of break down to more of a single file DRS kind of vibe race. And you see Gasly, he already had the grid penalty of 6 positions, and he was starting 10th. He actually worked his way down to about 15th, after just a few laps. And so like, what's going on with him? Not having a good start. But by lap 5, Magnussen's up 4 spots, Zhou's up 5 spots, and Russell's up 5 spots as well. And then tires. Most people started on softs. That was kind of the meta. Really kind of going into this, there was calls for possibly some weather issues throughout the race. And so teams were actually given extra sets of rain tires just in case, right? And so Red Bull started on mediums, Leclerc started on hards, and Sargent started on mediums, but everybody else started on softs. And so really this kind of race here in Spain has been traditionally a 2 or 3 stop race, and I find that nice to have that extra stop in there. It sometimes can add some more drama, add some more strategy in there compared to like a 1 or 2 stop race. I do enjoy a 2 or 3 stop race, but that's kind of what happened with the start of the race. And as I mentioned, it got kind of single filey, and that kind of brings us to the middle part of the race. All right, so as we get to the middle part of this race, there's a couple things that become very apparent, and one of them is that Mercedes looks very good. Both Russell and Hamilton may not have qualified like super well, and we know Mercedes has pretty good history here, so it's maybe not a surprise, but they just look super strong, and were really big climbers. Once we were kind of in the middle of this race here, you could see that they're going to be contending for podiums. And then something else that was apparent was that Aston Martin wasn't that. And usually, like throughout the year, it's been flipped, right? Aston Martin's been a little better than Mercedes, but this race really gave Mercedes an opportunity to best Aston Martin, and we'll talk about that later. But they really didn't have the pace, so it's kind of weird to not see Alonso up there. And so, really, the race kind of, and I mentioned it earlier, turned into more of like a single file-esque, DRS train-esque race, which has been like many races throughout the year. But something that I found a little bit unique was that this track had a very sweeping, fast turns, and it kind of lulled me to sleep, to be honest with you. It wasn't anything like super exciting, and a lot of people agree with me on Twitter, but it was okay. Something that the teams may not have planned for. I know I mentioned that there might be some rain in the forecast, and that also brought these cooler temperatures to race day as well. And with 31-degree track temperature, that brings in more tire deg, and that was something the teams needed to account for. And some of the drivers just burned through their tires quite quickly and were not very good at managing their tires. And as I mentioned, there was a 2 or 3 stop kind of race. And up until this point, there was no yellow. And I'm like, okay, based on qualifying, there was tons of people spinning out, tons of people in the gravel. There should be some sort of yellow or red, but there wasn't. And so I think some teams had to make adjustments accordingly and maybe stay out for longer stints. Some people had to come in a little bit sooner than they planned. And I think, teams that opted for tires, fresh tires, really saw some benefits there. And really you also see, with the rain situation, George Russell's like, I think it's raining on the track. And everybody kind of hears on the radio, they're like sticking their hands out like, what do you, like, I don't feel any rain. What's going on? A couple laps later, he's like, oh, maybe it's just the sweat off my forehead. Like, bro, come on, man. I mean, I guess if you're driving a car that fast, you may not be able to have the recognition of actual rain. You just kind of see what's in front of you. So I can understand that if it's like, right in front of you there, but you must be sweating a lot. But something else that's apparent throughout the middle part of this race is that Verstappen's just super dominant. I mean, he's starting to lap guys and he's just mowing guys down. I mean, you put a car that dominant with the DRS, it's not even fair. They don't even have a chance. But kind of moving on from there, we did see some drama towards the end of the race, specifically with Yuki and Zhou Guanyu. They kind of get into it a little bit, and so what happened, Yuki didn't give enough room to Zhou, and so he kind of got squeezed off the track a little bit. This is kind of some drama, some controversy on Twitter. People were like, well, Yuki shouldn't have gotten penalized for this, and we'll talk about the penalty once we get to the results, but he left him a little bit of room. Maybe he could have left a little bit more, but I feel like it's kind of a racing situation, to be honest with you. But Yeah, that's kind of the middle part of the race. And let's kind of get into a little bit of Max's shenanigans throughout the race. And so throughout the race, Max is just super dominant. He's just cruising, right? And I feel like some of the lines he takes is a little bit maybe unique to him, which is why he's so fast, right? But he was using a lot of track today specifically, and the stewards noticed that as well. And so what they saw was him exceeding the track limits, and so they gave him a few warnings. They're like, hey man, you exceeded the track limit there. And basically his team notified him, and he's like, what are you talking about? Exceeding the track limit? I don't know what you're talking about. Where? Like, he was just completely perplexed at where he was exceeding the track limit. And it was in the same spot in turn 5. And so he got a warning once, and then he got a warning twice. And I feel like he just kind of gets in this groove. And then, he's so far ahead in time. Like, not even if he got a penalty, it really wouldn't have mattered that much. But his team was worried about it. We'll talk about that. But so in turn 5, you got it twice. And then, we work down a little bit. His team's like, hey, you get one more. They're going to, throw a flag out and basically warn you that if you do it again, you'll get a penalty. And so really, he ends up doing it again. And so he is shown the black-white flag for exceeding track limits. And so he did this one in turn 10. So it's a different turn. But then his team's kind of, pretty upset. They're like, hey, man, you do it again, you're going to get a penalty. And he's like, well, he's so far ahead, but still, right? And so then Max asks, so who's got the fastest lap? Okay, then what's my fastest lap? And then, his race engineer is like, okay, can we just bring it home within the white lines, please? Don't try to go for the fastest lap. Let's just try to bring it home in the white lines, please. And there's some attitude there. I'm like, okay, giving him attitude. Max did not care. He just did not care. He's like, I'm getting this fastest lap. I'm a racer, dude. I'm a racer. And so he just pushes it super hard, and he gets the fastest lap, man. And it was kind of comical because his race engineers just didn't want him to try for it. They're just like, dude, you're already so far ahead. You already got this thing won. Just try to bring her home safely. And he just continues to push the envelope. And I feel like some of his race engineers, like, he's just such a true racer, man. He's a competitor, and I like that about him. A lot of things to not like about the whole Red Bull situation, but I do like Max's competitiveness. But that's kind of all I got for Max and his shenanigans. And so let's get into the results and my final thoughts. All right, so let's talk about the results of the race. And so Max takes it home, man, continues, really sweeps the weekend, fastest in all the practices, fastest in qualifying, fastest lap, and wins the race. And so, good on him. And then we see the Hamilton and Russell, the Mercedes bros, getting second and third, and this actually bumps them up in the championship points ahead of Aston Martin. And so that was pretty notable as Stroll and Alonso struggled a little bit today. After that, you see Sergio Perez working his way all the way up to fourth. Really, his goal was probably to get into the top 3, get on a podium. I think he was capable of that. It's just the Mercedes were a lot better than maybe everybody anticipated today, and so he wasn't able to do that. They actually had some pushback, and so it'll be interesting to see that fight, and maybe Mercedes kind of solidify themselves there in that spot in front of Aston Martin. Next, we have Carlos Sainz in 5th, and his partner is nowhere to be found. Actually, Leclerc worked his way up to 11th, which honestly, with all of his issues, could have been a lot worse for him. Then we have Stroll in 6th, Fernando in 7th, and so with qualifying, Lance was ahead of Alonso. Alonso works his way back up, and I feel like them being back-to-back there almost proves that they just weren't good here this week. There's no fluke or mistake that solidified this up. Them being where they're at, they just didn't have the pace this week. Which happens. I guess it's a long year. Then we have Esteban Ocon in 8th, Pierre Gasly, his partner, in 10th, and somebody that I haven't been too familiar with seeing up here is Zhou Guanyu. And I know there was a penalty with Yuki, and there was that whole drama there. But it's good on Alfa Romeo getting in the top 10, getting some points. Good on them, right? I mentioned Charles Leclerc in 11th. Yuki in 12th. I think he had top 10 pace like he normally does. He just had that one issue that kind of bumped him down. Piastri in 13th. We know that Norris had issues, but Piastri, I think McLaren in general probably should have been trying to fight for a top 10, trying to get some sort of points out of this weekend, and I know they were anticipating that as well. So I feel like that might have been a disappointment to them being in 13th. Nick DeVries in 14th. We saw him pretty decent in P1, practice 1, and I don't know how much that aligns with his race pace, but getting in 14th there. And then you see the Haas friends 15th and 18th, Magnussen and Hulkenberg, and maybe you just expect a little bit more of them, but maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. At this point, I'm not sure. Alex Albon in 16th, and then you see Logan Sargent in 20th. And so they're continuing to struggle this year. And then we have the only guy I haven't mentioned yet is Bottas in 19th. And so you think, okay, well, Zhao's all the way up in 9th. Why are you all the way down in 19th, dude? You're like a pretty well-seasoned veteran here in F1, and you let a young buck best you. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, with how qualifying kind of went, with 7 different teams in the top 7. I was expecting maybe a little bit more diversity, and I thought it was honestly an okay race. I mean, nothing special, but it was cool to see Mercedes, claw their way back. Even Sergio Perez kind of work his way back. I think the lolling, sweeping turns could be a little bit boring at times. DRS is just continuing to be overpowering. I could say this every time I get on the camera. It's just crazy. And there's no limit to it either. In like a lot of races, like in a lot of racing series, like push to pass and other forms of that are limited, and the DRS is not. And so maybe that's something they need to look into. I'm not sure. But, good on Max, and we'll continue to move forward. And so I'll see you guys in a couple more weeks. I believe we're going to Canada. And so that'll be a little bit closer to me. But enjoy the week off, and maybe I'll make a video and you guys can be on the lookout for that. But thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you guys, and have a great week.